Good evening. Welcome back. Thank you for viewing our Sacred Selections non-event event, and thank you for taking time to listen to David and I as we try and explain more about Sacred Selections and how it works and how we work together. You know, we use a theme every year for our presentations, and David would like to tell you a part of that theme that we've chosen for this year.
So our theme this year is taken from 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 15, where Peter writes, "For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men." You can see on your screen the some 30 events that we had last year in 2019.
Isn't that wonderful?
And when I look at this image, what strikes me is the song that we often sing, "Encamped along the hills of light, ye Christian soldiers rise." And each one of those yellow dots represents an occasion where we went to war with Satan. Each one of these events represents a battle where we went in with the purpose of rescuing a child from this dark and fallen world, and we were successful. When it comes to the will of God in terms of caring for children, Jesus is very clear. He says, if you remember in Matthew chapter 18, and I think it's in verse 10, he says, "For it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost." And that's the work that we do. That's the work that you have been involved in for the last 13 years.
And thank you.
And while our occasion and our means of meeting tonight is different, it's the same purpose. We talk a lot about restoring first century Christianity. And that applies not only to what we do in our assemblies, but it applies to how we live our lives. The acts of compassion, the acts of generosity, and of course, as the first century Christians were known, the way they took care of the thousands of abandoned children. This attribute, this characteristic of the first century Christians became so remarkable and so unique that the Romans began to refer to this what they called the sect of the Jews or the Galileans. They referred to them as a third race. And maybe, under inspiration, this is something that Peter had in mind when he called his brothers and sisters a peculiar people, because what they did was unheard of in that time. When we look at James chapter 1 and verse 27, which to some degree is our mission statement, it's important to understand that this isn't just a command, but like in the first century, caring for the fatherless and the widow was a defining characteristic of their faith and their religion. And that is something that we have been striving to replicate in the 21st century. The last Roman emperor was known as Julian the Apostate. He was the last pagan emperor of Rome, and he hated Christians. In one of his writings, he records, "These impious Galileans," referring to the Christians, "not only feed their own, but ours also, welcoming them with their agape. They attract them as children are attracted with cakes. And while the pagan priests neglect the poor, the hated Galileans devote themselves to the work of charity, and by a display of false compassion have established and given effect to their pernicious errors." Their success at transforming the world was not simply because they had a better religion than the Jews or a better philosophy than the Greeks, but they had a better way of life for everyone. It's also recorded that on Julian, his dying bed, his dying breath, he stated two words, "Viciti Galilei," which means the Galileans have conquered. Our good work is a big part of how Christians have always changed the world. In fact, when Jesus said, "Let your light so shine that men may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven," that's one of the reasons why we do what we do in caring and finding homes for these children. What we all do individually, as you can see from these battlegrounds across the country, what we all do individually becomes who we are known for collectively, just as they were in the first century.
Tomorrow night, we will bring to you some more ideas of this that David's talking about, our theme of how we've let our light shine in a very dark world, and give you some quotes of some professionals that we work with, because we think that that's very powerful to show the work of Sacred Selections.
Good night for now. Thanks for
Thank
listening.
you. Good
We'll
night.
see you tomorrow night.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
evening.